Right, so Labour Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood has introduced quite a sweeping range of new restrictions on legal and illegal immigration. She has billed this as the biggest shake-up of the asylum system in 20 years. Joe, I mean, we can get into a little bit as to whether we think any of this will work a bit later. But first of all, we should just comment on the tone of this. This is quite extraordinary coming from a Labour Home Secretary. It's certainly ruffled a few feathers within her own party. What's been your take on the what's your immediate reaction to her announcement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, a very positive step in the right direction. And as you said, we can quibble over whether these things will actually work or whether they're actually a good idea or not. But I think what's really important is the very fact that Mahmood is looking to open up a conversation on the issue of migration. And she's actually prepared to say that it's a problem. Yeah. It's a problem that so many people are coming over in small boats and even the legal migration that we've had at such high levels has created very monocultural, in fact, communities and has not been great for integration and great for Britain. And it seems to me that it's not even any measures in particular that people find such a problem, people among the Labour Party backbenchers, Shabana Mahmood's opponents, but the very fact that she wants to talk about this. Yeah. And for me, I think that's what's so important about it, that she is actually saying, look, we have to be grown-ups as a country. We have to recognise that we've got a problem here and we have to be able to talk about what's been going on. And I think it just seems that there are so many people in the Labour Party who would far rather that we didn't talk about this, that we just ignored it, that we pretend that there is no problem at all, that everything's just hunky-dory. And I think she's done us a really great service by opening up this conversation.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There does still seem to be slightly too many people in Labour, but maybe those in the government, perhaps whether they're looking at the polling figures, whether they're looking at the March of Reform UK, or whether maybe Shabana Mahmood just gets it. It seems as if this idea that they can't hide behind this idea that, oh, it's just a distraction from real issues. Migration isn't really a problem. That's just the right-wing press, going off on one. Clearly, this is something that people are feeling. People are genuinely have good cause to be angry about.
Absolutely. I think this is happening all over Europe as well. I mean, so you've got Shabana Mahmood announcing all these big changes she's making here, but there's even more radical changes in places like Greece, for instance, where they've suspended the asylum system as a whole. They feel it's lost all public legitimacy and it needs to be reworked and revamped. I think absolutely 100% Labour realise that if they are going to have any fighting chance in the next election, they have to start looking at this issue. This is the number one issue right now. That is what we need to be talking about. I'm personally a little bit sceptical of the reforms. I don't think they have strong enough deterrents built into them, like you have with, say, US and Australia, which had very successful models. I think a lot of what she's doing is kind of tinkering. My big fear is you've got this unelected, unaccountable bureaucracy in the Home Office, which are making utterly bizarre decisions when it comes to approving asylum claims, like very, very, very far adrift of common sense. Asylum claims that no one in the public would ever approve. They've got much more liberal ideas about who should be coming in. And I feel the public, it's kind of those decisions are opaque to the public, and the public are unhappy with it. They know something's wrong. And I'm not sure that she's making a big enough change to make that change.
I think what's interesting is that we can sit here and I agree, Candice, we can say, well, perhaps these changes are not actually that big after all and may not even have the impact that she's intending them to have. And yet the backlash to what she's come out with and suggested has been completely unhinged. I mean, to suggest that curbing migration is the equivalent of being a Nazi, being a fascist. You just look at the vocabulary that's been levelled against her and it's just insane. The references are far-right, Nazi, fascist. The insults have just come absolutely thick and fast. You can't help wondering if it's perhaps more so because of her being, to put it bluntly, a brown woman of Pakistani heritage herself, as if somehow she's like a traitor to the cause for daring to raise these issues. But I mean, you even had the spectacle on Radio 4 this morning of Lord Dubs, who came to the UK himself as a child, fled Nazi prosecution, as if he's held as some kind of moral arbiter now, and so he was being levelled and kind of weaponised against Shabana Mahmood. Yeah. What would happen if there was a little Lord Dubs nowadays? You'd be quite happy to see him killed and persecuted and sent back to a war zone. And Shabana Mahmood had to point out quite reasonably, that Albania isn't actually a war zone.
Yeah.
No one is being killed in Albania for their political beliefs or for their identity. And actually, the real problem is that when we say that if you have a child in this country, you're migrate or bring a child to this country, then you can never be returned. It actually incentivizes migrants putting young children in small boats and risking their lives to cross the channel. And that is deeply immoral.
Absolutely. And I think it's also very insulting to the public who are not instinctively, wanting to shut down the, pull up the drawbridge to anyone who is suffering from persecution or fleeing from war. I mean, there was huge public support for the Ukraine Family Scheme, for the relocation of Hong Kongers under CCP tyranny. We get when there is an issue like that needs to be dealt with. The fact that they can't see a difference between that and, say, the small boats crisis, which is basically just open organised crime, people trafficking happening in plain sight. The public knows that those two things are different, and they know that the asylum system is basically become a backdoor channel for illegal migration. And that's why clearly even the Labour Party recognises that it's got to change.
It does. But like I say, I think it's just baby steps. I don't think they're quite there yet. And I think that you can see even with the worklessness crisis as well, it's all couched in sort of, if you want to do something about it, you're cruel. You're a cruel person. It's mean. And I've had debates about that with people, talking about, for instance, I don't think people with depression and anxiety should be left to just rot at home, essentially, and never have a job. And I had someone actually say to me, you just hate disabled people. That's childish.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think that is the perspective. And I think that's one of the big disadvantages of Labour having the huge majority they have. I think a lot of people sort of saw this a while ago as the backbenchers are going to decide everything. And the cabinet really struggles to sort of get them in line and do sensible things.
And the backbenchers are still living in kind of la-la land, even if people in Number 10 bizarrely have their heads screwed to the ground a little bit more. One thing I did think is worth mentioning is that obviously Shabana Mahmood has been called a Nazi, a fascist. Actually, the real inspiration for this comes from Denmark, and not from the populist right in Denmark, but from the Social Democrats, who have been kind of pioneering this mixture of immigration control and, I guess, kind of bog standard social democratic left-wing economic policies. And they've had enormous electoral success as a result of this. Is this clearly people in Team Starmer recognise this, but the backbenchers obviously don't. They think it's immoral. Do they think that Denmark is run by Nazis? Do you remember when everyone used to love Scandinavia, when the left used to fawn over Scandinavia? I don't think you don't hear much of that anymore.
I think it's bizarre that in the run-up to the last, just after Labour won the last election, you'd have all these newspaper columnists kind of fawning all over Keir Starmer and it's so amazing that the adults are back in the room. And you heard that phrase again and again, the adults are back in charge, the sensible people are back in control. Well, when it comes to migration, we can make the case for people who are fleeing war zones, and I absolutely agree that we should do that. But there is also an economic reality to taking migrants who are, as Candice says, going to end up on the benefit system. And Shabana Mahmood was saying that the cost of having a migrant on benefits is £30,000 a year. Every single year that they're on benefits, that's £30,000, and 500 migrants a day are signing up to being on benefits. So, for all these are the adults in the room, supposedly, they're not very good at maths because, you carry on at that rate. And there is just an economic cost that a country is being expected to bear that we do not have the capacity in our economy. I mean, we'll come on and talk about that later, I'm sure. But if we had a very, very productive economy, this might be no problem at all. But like I say, for the adults in the room, they're not very good at the basic maths on all of this.
And another really interesting point that she made was actually that if you have uncontrolled immigration as we do now, that this is destabilizing communities and leading to racism. And she, used quite strong language. She talked about her experience of being called to quote her. I think that's quite an interesting argument, isn't it, Candice, to say that actually, if you have unstable communities, if you don't know who's coming in and out, actually that can have a negative effect on the people of colour who are living here and who are settled, and people might assume that they, we don't know anything about them. They might not belong here.
Yeah, what I'm also finding as well with this discussion that you're getting this very negative attitude to immigration and migration as a whole, whereas people were quite relaxed about it, maybe 10 years ago, especially after Brexit. You saw a lot of the concerns about immigration really diminished because people felt they had that sense of control. But when you take it away from them, as it was with the European Union, for instance, then they start getting angry about it. And then you start seeing these concerns rising again. And then you'll sort of get like very sort of negative attitudes. I think that the number one thing is people need to feel they have control over it. They have control over who's coming in and out of their country, who's part of their community. All of these things are legitimate questions. But I think that on the left, unfortunately, it's framed as racism. If you even talk about this or say anything in terms of like community or identity, you are a bigot and you are shut down. So they've never been able to develop a sort of sophisticated, sensible idea about stuff like this.
And that on that point of control, Joe, I mean, it seems like the missing part, or I think this is maybe not missing because it's deliberate, in Shabana's plan, is that it's going out of its way not to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. She says, she will pass legislation to direct judges to have a more diminished view of what family life means. Are they just simply, I mean, obviously we know Keir Starmer is completely wedded to the European Convention, but are they just shooting themselves in the foot here by not grasping the nettle? I think this seems to me is the thing that's going to trip them up.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's why she can say all these things. And I'm glad she's saying them. I'm glad we're having this conversation. But without leaving the ECHR, I think this is a pipe dream. I can't see any of these changes happening. But just to come back to this point about racism, which I think is a really important one, I think for me, the important thing that goes hand in hand with migration is integration. And I think we can be a much more welcoming society if we're prepared to take the time and effort to integrate people. And I think one problem with sheer volume that we've seen over recent years is that in and of itself makes the process of integration more difficult. When you've got rapidly changing communities, it becomes more difficult to integrate people. But when we no longer seem to have a sense or struggle to articulate actually what it means to be British, well, what exactly is it that you're integrating people into? When all we are as a country, sometimes it seems, is an NHS and a benefit system, it's very difficult to then promote a positive vision that you want to integrate people into. But if you look at the detail of what actually goes on in Denmark, it seems that hand in hand with restricting migration, they really go to quite considerable efforts to break up communities that they think are becoming ghettoised, and to actually almost to take a very tough line on actually enforcing integration within Danish society. And I think that's exactly what we need to happen here. But exactly as you're saying, Fraser, I can't see us having the guts in our society. I can't see lawyers and the Labour Party being happy to say, well, actually, we do need to go to parts of Birmingham. We do need to go to parts of Bradford, which have become very ghettoised communities. And actually, in the interests of the people in those areas, enforce a much tougher line on integration and a much more robust sense of what it means to be British, what it means to be part of our society. And this is our expectation, that you will learn to speak English, that you will get a job, that you will contribute to our society, and in return we will be very welcoming of you.